Catherine Alexander. She just recently defended her dissertation in late Qing baojuan from University of Chicago and accepted a position as assistant professor of Chinese at the University of Colorado Boulder. Her research interests include the popular literature, culture, and religion in Ming and Qing. The title of her paper is Embodying Guanyin, Embodying Yaojing, Devotional Deviance in Liu Xiang baojuan.
Thank you all for coming, and thank you especially to the panel organizer and our amazing discussants. I'm looking forward to hearing your comments and hearing questions from the audience. Thank you. So, in Liu Xiang baojuan, virtuous Xiangnü, our protagonist, her mother-in-law hates her from the moment that she enters the family home as the bride to the youngest son, Ma Yu. Lecturing Ma Yu on the threat that his wife poses to his future and the reasons that Lady Ma must separate the happy couple only 3 days after their marriage, she makes the following comparison in a quatrain that strikingly features a slant rhyme on Guanyin with yaojing. Now, go ahead and focus diligently on studying. Leave practicing aestheticism and performing Guanyin to her. Wholeheartedly grasp onto your books and read them. Don't hang on to thoughts of that bewitching demon. This connection between Guanyin and yaojing, made explicit in a derisive comment, presents us with an opportunity to consider how being Guanyin was represented in the popular imagination of the late Qing. In this paper, I argue that Xiangnü's fictional life embodies another way of performing Guanyin for women, a vernacularized one that inspired many performative acts of recitation and reprinting of the text of Liu Xiang baojuan in the late Qing. Liu Xiang baojuan, the precious scroll of Liu Xiang, is a work of religious performance literature with links actually back into the late Ming revival of lay Buddhism, and also to Chuanqi dramatists, in particular Ye Xianzu of Yu Yao. Though we lack any pre-Qianlong era editions, the earliest edition listed in catalogs is 1774, evidence implies that the text maintained a steady, if subdued, presence in Jiangnan from the late Ming until the mid-19th century, with probably about one edition coming out every decade or so. And they were published by small temple and studio presses. Now, this quiescent picture of Liu Xiang baojuan's publication and cultural reach changes dramatically after the Taiping War in the late 19th century, and it was likely fueled by a revival of religion during and after the war. So from 1869 until 1900, this text experienced an explosion of publication across Jiangnan and down into Guangdong, largely privately funded by temples and groups of donors. I'm not getting into lithographic printing in Shanghai. That's a separate print world. And it's left archives worldwide stocked with dozens of different editions of the work. The Baojuan, 中国保证总录 has 42 separate editions listed in it. Theories to account for this popularity will have to be saved for a different AAS, so keep your eyes open. What is significant about this boom for the sake of our panel is twofold. Firstly, this is one of the very few pieces of religious performance literature that we know, via publication dates and donor lists, generated significant and widespread interest on the parts of a great many people in a great many places for about a 30-year span. If the vernacular is about becoming ordinary and accessible, Liu Xiang baojuan was certainly vernacularized by its popularity in the late Qing. Secondly, it's important for us in this panel on Guanyin because as a baojuan featuring a virtuous female protagonist who overcomes significant hardships in the pursuit of her religious vocation, sound familiar? The story owes itself a great debt to Xiangshan baojuan, which featured Guanyin's incarnation as a princess in a land long ago and far away. In this sense, Liu Xiang baojuan vernacularizes Princess Miaoshan's labors by bringing them home to Shandong, embodying them in the humble form of a butcher restaurateur's daughter. Xiangnü steadfastly practices her piety, including by embroidering Guanyin's 12 vows on decorative banners in her own home shrine.
But she also brings Liu Xiang's elevated arguments with the ministers and the emperor down to the arguments of a young bride's heated exchange with her evil mother-in-law and devious sisters-in-law. So in this paper, I want to explore 3 questions that the quatrain I quoted earlier, with its rhyming connection of Guanyin and yaojing, raises for me, which are as follows. How is Xiangnü, an attractive woman who could conceivably be a yaojing, made similar to Guanyin over the course of the tale? What common references and imagery do they share? 2, if we accept Lady Ma's equivalence of Guanyin with the role of a yaojing temptress, what are these seductions that Liu Xiangnü is actually involved in over the course of the story? And lastly, how does this pairing help us expand our ideas of vernacularized ways of performing Guanyin, inspired by or related to the ways we see it represented in this tale? So the most obvious parallel between Guanyin and seduction comes in the sexuality of Fish Basket Guanyin, which is a story where, multiple versions of a story, where Guanyin incarnates as a beautiful woman who promises to marry whichever man can, over the course of successive days, perfectly memorize increasingly difficult sections of sutras. And eventually she does marry one man, who's also surnamed Ma, and she dies the day of her wedding, and eventually a traveling monk comes along and says, no, this woman was actually an incarnation of the Bodhisattva. And everybody in the village is taught a lesson about the ephemeral nature of beauty and the value, really, of investing in heavenly merit by memorizing sutras. There will be more about this ephemeral nature of beauty later in the case of Xiangshan. The next parallel comes in the formal similarities of the plots in both Xiangshan baojuan and Liu Xiang baojuan. Let me focus on one of these here. The moment that Princess Xiangshan directly refuses her father's order to marry and produce heirs for him, the first insult he throws at her is yaojing. Dozens more follow, but that unsettling dynamic of a father calling his daughter bewitching remains present throughout the text, particularly when he confronts her alone in the depths of the night and tries to detail the pleasures of sex that will await her if she will only reconsider that marriage resistance. And in Liu Xiang, Lady Ma is likewise threatened by Xiangnü's potential to bewitch and tempt, now either by religion or sex. Other similarities exist just even in the form of the book. So this is our earliest edition of Xiangshan baojuan from 1773, and the iconography of Guanyin is quite recognizable. The iconography of Liu Xiangnü is simplified, but we can see that there are things that are still based similarly on it. Guanyin here is sitting on a rock. Xiangnü here is as well, but Xiangnü doesn't have the markers of a goddess. Here she is a little more like Guanyin with her white robe and similar imagery. And here she's actually riding a cloud. So as time goes on, Xiangnü's imagery sort of starts to blend more with Guanyin imagery, including, in fact, an edition of this baojuan that I've seen where it just uses the opening image from Xiangshan baojuan as the opening image for Liu Xiang baojuan. So to that printer, it was roughly, it was just as useful to put that image there. But let's think now that we've established this equivalence, what are the seductions? What kind of temptress, bewitching demon is Xiangnü? So in addition to drawing on the tropes of religious suffering, release, and dangerous female sexuality that were established in Xiangshan baojuan, Liu Xiang also draws heavily upon caizijia scholar beauty romance. Predictably, Ma Yu is an accomplished scholar who passes all levels of the civil service examination with flying colors and receives the emperor's blessing. So Xiangnü, likewise, has to be the most beautiful woman in existence. And she is. When she's introduced to her family on her first day of the marriage, the poetry says, a natural rare beauty, so young, so delicate, beautiful like a flower, like a jade maiden, as if Chang'e had descended from the moon, or an immortal maiden had come down to this realm of dust. Again, this is the imagery of the beautiful Taoist maidens who descend to both enlighten but also entice a male literatus. The poem ends with, though her sisters-in-law in all their paint and ornamentation looked good, they could not compare with even the smallest measure of Xiangnü's beauty. So unadorned, the way that Xiangnü is described makes her as a sexual seducer and temptress a real possibility due to this overwhelmingly natural, unadorned beauty. The pivotal scene also establishes the source of the conflict for the remainder of the text, based on her beauty. She outshines her sisters-in-law's pampered beauty and sets them against her when she refuses their offers of fancier clothing and jewelry. So they report on this lack of gratefulness to the evil mother-in-law, and the conflict is set from there. That night, the sisters-in-law then eavesdrop outside the marriage bedroom. I'm not sure what they were hoping to hear, but what they do hear is Xiangnü lecturing her husband that whether or not he has a belly full of literary ambitions, his efforts would be better spent reciting sutras. And so they report this to the mother-in-law as well. It's in that context that we have the next morning Lady Ma's lecture to Ma Yu, where she ridicules the subject of Xiangnü's lecture and the impropriety of religious proselytization as pillow talk. She says, "How could newlyweds be expected to have pure bodies snuggling together under the blankets discussing cultivation? She's making up all kinds of bewitching words, infatuating and beguiling you in the bedroom." Xiangnü, instead of seducing Ma Yu away from his studies with sex and beauty, as every yaojing exemplar in short stories is known to do, has used religion to do exactly the same thing, deluding him just as dangerously in Lady Ma's eyes. Her accusations betray this fear of Xiangnü's untrammeled, unadorned beauty. So, with the couple forcibly separated, Xiangnü's pursuit of her religious vocation grows stronger, just as her conflicts with Lady Ma intensify and the violence that she receives as a response intensifies as well. Xiangnü's beauty is really at the heart of this whole story and conflict. She continuously struggles against the socially predetermined roles for an attractive woman: blushing bride, beguiling demon, seductive adulteress, and vulnerable victim. She rejects each one of these in favor of pursuing her religious merit. Now, she's banished from the home after another fight with her mother-in-law to tend the vegetable patch at the family graves. And she delights in her freedom. She has no more family responsibilities. And of course, meanwhile, back at home, her sisters-in-law are continuing to plot against her because she's not really been gotten rid of yet. So they use her attractiveness against her once again. They lie to Lady Ma and say that while Xiangnü has been beyond the walls of the home, she has been having multiple adulterous relationships with anybody who came past the cemetery. And she's assumed capable of these because she is a yaojing after all. And however, the truth is that outside the walls of her family home, the most that her beautiful body has actually been occupied with has been recovering from a deadly beating administered by her brothers-in-law who happened to come across her, the only ones who come across her out there. Alone in the field, Xiangnü has not been entertaining men with sex like her sisters-in-law think, but with death. The only foreign body that actually reached under her skirts was this rabbit that she covers as her hunting brothers-in-law come running by. And when they ask her, "Where'd the rabbit go?" she says, "What rabbit?" So they beat her to death. By showing no concern for the fate of her body, but concern for the rabbit, and being willing to give up her life for the sake of an innocent animal, the animal is thus able to give her back her life. The rabbit runs off, grasps a stalk of magic grass, alerts the cemetery caretakers, and brings her back from the dead. This is the first supernatural invention in Xiangnü's life, and it will not be the last. The second intervention by nature follows shortly after. Because of this rumor that Xiangnü has been taking in callers, Xiangnü is summoned home, and Lady Ma beats her within an inch of her life again, and shears off all of her hair. She then throws the young woman and the pile of hair out onto the street. Echoing the rabbit's concern for Xiangnü's bodily integrity, crows sweep down from the sky and collect Xiangnü's hair and take it off to be preserved somewhere. The narrator notes, cutting her hair and changing her appearance, now she looks like the Buddha. We're moving further and further away from an external appearance of yaojing. But is this actually sufficient to guarantee her safety from these accusations of seductiveness? Not yet. So there's one more instance. She's alone and defenseless, sleeping in abandoned temples at night, when two guangun come across her and threaten to rape her. These beggars see her, and the text emphasizes again that she's still beautiful and defenseless. So Xiangnü confronts the men and emphasizes that they will have terrible rebirths and be reborn as insects or beasts if they go ahead with their plans. And that fails to deter them. So she calls upon heaven, and the men are struck down in terrifying, crippling pain. And they beg her for release, and she makes their release from this pain contingent on their conversion, which they readily assent to. So rather than the unprompted responses of nature in the first half of the text, in the second half of the text, Xiangnü demonstrates that having shed all concern for her body, having died for a rabbit, having lost her hair, heaven now responds directly to her pleas. It draws, however, our attention back because she's shed these external markers of beauty, but the text still threatens her with the consequences of undefended beauty. It draws our attention back to this tension that runs through it, this perceived inherency of female identity as yaojing, whether she likes it or not. Not tied to hair or clothes, but simply because she's still a jiaoren. This is still a jiaoren tale. But Xiangnü is now more powerful. She can call upon heaven to defend her, and she retains control of her body. So initially, Xiangnü conforms with the audience's expectations of what a jiaoren romance should do. The jiaoren should be the most beautiful. She should be like Chang'e, descending from the moon, and like an immortal jade maiden. But then we begin to see over the course of the story that there is a contrast between the socially constructed expectations of the rewards for physical beauty. She should be the wife of the best scholar. She should have all of the adornments. And instead, the reality of the tale confronts us with Xiangnü caring little about her physicality. The fact that this disregard is what gets her into trouble, and that her in-laws are bent on destroying her physically. These all signify that there's an underlying assertion in this story, that there's more to value in this woman than her looks, and that she's actually capable of doing more than just falling in love with the nearest taizhi that she runs into. As a beautiful jiaoren, Xiangnü is expected to perform beauty, like her sisters-in-law, and accept and enhance her potential to attract. Instead, Xiangnü defies the expectations of both in-laws and audience alike, to perform religion, to perform Guanyin, as her mother-in-law so dismissively says at the beginning. So now we come to my third question. How does this pairing help us expand our ideas of vernacular performance of Guanyin inspired by or related to Xiangnü? Now, the text itself, via Xiangnü's efforts to convert everybody that she meets, presents a very simple formula for piety. Retire from public life, retire from affected performances that are put on for the sake of others, like the ornamentation at her wedding, eat vegetarian food, practice nianfo or songjing. And this is the contents of her lectures to every character, including her husband, the one that his sisters-in-law overhear and report on her for. So while it seems that her conversion of her husband was interrupted by her mother-in-law's interference, and the fact that he goes on to be the best scholar in the kingdom, her efforts are also not in vain for him. This is not only a story where the jiaoren is confronted with not being a jiaoren, but where the taizhi also rejects his taizhi role. Through her wandering preaching in Volume 2, one of the women who she preaches to and converts becomes the woman that Ma Yu's parents force him to marry as a concubine. And so this woman, who Xiangnü has gotten to first before her in-laws do, continues Xiangnü's lectures, as the text says, from dawn until dusk, so not just within the marriage bed. She actively refuses to play the part of the seductress. She says that I am not here to 迷恋 you. So in this sense, we have a new definition for what it means to be a wife. We've moved away from the marriage resistance of Xiangshan baojuan and the fact that was impossible for most women in China at the time, and have started to look at a new wifely duty instead. That a good wife will resist ornamentation, and she will resist conforming with the socially constructed jiaren roles. And she'll use the space of private interactions with her husband to urge him to religious piety. So to seduce him, in a sense, to read the sutras in the imitation of fish basket Guanyin, while also remaining as pure and devoted as Princess Xiangshan at the same time. There's no deviance to be found in this kind of jiaren, unless one aligns oneself with the tyrannical mother-in-law. Whereas Xiangshan, and to be fair, eventually Xiangnü herself, do retire from society and have isolation apart from the home. Most of this text takes place within the lay sphere, within the home, and over a half a dozen individual named characters don't retire to convents or monasteries. Like much of lay religious literature, this text situates itself within the space of the home, and the home is where conversion and practice occur. And the impetus for salvation is largely through lay efforts. Xiangnü herself is not a nun, but she is the vocal preacher throughout the entire text. Also, the text, again, is not just about Xiangnü, it's also about her husband, who makes this journey from stereotypical scholar to actually becoming a Buddha by the end of the text. And he also goes down and has a hell tour, and I will also keep your eyes out for future AAS papers about Ma Yu. So it is perhaps this accessibility for both men and women that allowed in part for this broad popularity of the text in the late Qing, and the range of readings and different recreations that grew out of this single text. Liu Xiang baojuan in some ways seems just about as attractive as Liu Xiangnü herself. In the wake of its abrupt rise to empire-wide prominence in the 1860s, criticism certainly followed in the forms of references to the work in early 20th century anti-superstition novels, and most famously in Zhou Zhuoren's 1936 essay condemning the text as leading women off into superstitious religion. But stepping back from those elite cultural productions, we're given glimpses of this work's ongoing reception and reinterpretation. Things like this early 20th century Shanghai lithographic edition, which was still quite popular in that market as well. And if you look at this, the imagery has even merged closer to Guanyin imagery. She has her own vase with a willow branch, and she's got some sutras behind her. In addition to this kind of development of the iconography of Liu Xiangnü, we also have baojuan adaptations. We have a spread to other genres, including Fujian Pinhua, in which she is much more like a Taoist saint and actually rides a cloud around and goes to hell herself to rescue people. And also stage productions in urban Shanghai that toured to Taiwan in the 1920s. And as late as this Yuezhi version here shown in the Shaoxing Theater News in 1941, Liu Xiangnü in her garden planting vegetables. So Xiangnü, a beauty who denied the role that literature and culture laid out for her to perform, embodies this Guanyin yaojing pairing in such a way that virtue and not deviance triumphs over her mother-in-law's division.